In this video, I want to talk about the basics of using on-camera flash in a typical indoor environment. And we're going to assume you're familiar with the basic operation of your camera, and that includes things like knowing how to choose and set your exposure mode, your exposure settings like ISO, aperture, and shutter speed, and how to use the exposure compensation and flash exposure compensation features on your camera. Now, even though not every DSLR and flash system work the exact same way, most of the stuff I'm going to show you applies to flash photography across the board. All right, so let's talk about the kind of flash unit you'll need as we move forward with these tutorials. Now, your flash unit should have a swiveling and rotating head if you're going to get the most out of using it as an on-camera flash. And the flash unit should also be compatible with your camera, especially in the sense that they can talk to the same language when it comes to through-the-lens flash metering. So, for example, if you've got a Canon camera, you need a flash that understands Canon's version of TTL, which is eTTL. Now, Nikon uses what it calls iTTL in its flash control system. Now, TTL is going to be important for some applications, but not for everything that you shoot. And most of the time, my portrait work, when I'm using off-camera flash, now that's done with manual flash, and I don't use or need TTL for that. But for on-camera flash, TTL is really the best way to go, especially when you want the freedom of movement, which means changes in distances between you and your subject. TTL takes care of the flash output. That's the amount of light it needs to put out. It takes care of all this automatically for you. The setting up your flash is pretty easy. Just secure it to the camera's flash shoe. Make sure the flash and camera are both powered on. Also, make sure the flash is set to TTL mode. You know, every flash is different, so check your flash manual for instructions on how to change the mode. Tip: if your flash has high-speed sync, go ahead and have that activated. That way, it'll come on automatically in certain situations where it's needed. Now, indoors, I like to use my camera in manual mode for maximum control, but really, using the camera in program mode or fully automatic mode, that's going to give you good results most of the time. But I'd encourage you to learn to use your camera in manual mode because it's going to save you in different lighting situations. Just, knowing how all that works. All right, so let's keep our camera in manual mode for this tutorial. So for your camera settings, you want to set your ISO to something on the low end like 100 or 200. Set your shutter speed to the maximum flash sync speed for your camera. Now on this camera, it's 1/250th of a second. All right, even if you're shooting in RAW, which allows you to adjust your white balance later in post, I like to set my white balance for the conditions that I'm actually shooting in. So in this case, it'll be flash, and this helps give me accurate colors in the previews. And as for aperture, I like to use f4, something in that range. And you might be wondering why we're using manual camera settings together with automatic TTL flash control. And the reason for that is because we can have full control of our camera settings in manual mode and still take advantage of TTL, which is going to adjust our flash output automatically for us. And if we used our on-camera flash in manual mode, we'd have to adjust the flash output constantly with even slight changes in distance between our camera and our subject. So it's the distance from our flash to our subject that really affect flash exposure. The distance from the camera to the subject doesn't really matter, but because your flash is located on your camera for on-camera flash, any changes in the distance between the camera and the subject are consequently going to affect the flash to subject distance. So as the distance from the flash to the subject changes, the flash output power has to be adjusted, or your camera settings are going to have to be adjusted. So using TTL for on-camera flash just makes things a lot easier. Now, this video is about on-camera flash, but I want to explain that TTL isn't always the best choice, especially when using off-camera flash. Now, in setups like this, where the subject and flash units are all stationary for a series of shots, manual flash is probably the better way to go. In setups like this, our camera can move around freely, and exposure is going to stay consistent because the flash to the subject distance stays the same, and our flash settings are locked in. Okay, so we've got our flash on the camera. The camera is set to manual mode. We've got our settings locked in, and our flash is set to TTL. And this all virtually ensures that we get decent flash exposures. TTL isn't perfect though. It's set up for typical scenes where you've got a lot of midtones, so it's not great where most of the scene is very light or very dark. TTL can get the flash output wrong, like in this example here where most of the scene is white. On the left, you can see that TTL by itself underexposed the scene. And to fix that, you can use the flash exposure compensation feature on your camera to dial in more flash output on your next exposure. This example is the flip side where most of the scene is dark. TTL pumps out too much light in order to get most of the scene into midtone range. But we want the blacks to actually look black here, so we dial down the flash output with flash exposure compensation to override what TTL thinks is the proper output. And this all makes it easy because you can adjust the output of the flash while still taking advantage of TTL. Flash exposure compensation, we can just call it FEC, can usually be adjusted with a simple dial on the camera. Dial it up for more light than TTL is giving us, dial it down for less. Okay, that's the basics of using on-camera flash in TTL. In our next video, we're going to look at on-camera flash modifiers.